Hey friends, it's Adam from Bantha Overland, and today I want to talk about a serious issue: dangling cables. Now, as I've been out there traveling and checking out other people's rigs, I've seen an epidemic of cables hanging out of strange places on adventure rigs. I've seen them coming out of doorways, I've seen them coming out of windows. Now, I have to admit, I'm guilty of this. I've passed cables through doorways or this little hatch in the side of my truck camper, and it works okay, but it starts to be a mess. There's cables all over inside the camper, there's equipment sitting here and there, and it's a hazard waiting to happen. I'm gonna trip over it or drop something on the floor, and I'm not gonna have Starlink, or I'm gonna ruin some other piece of gear. And after living in this tragic situation for about a year, I finally did some research and decided to install a Starlink cable pass-through in the side of our truck camper. Now, I had sort of put this off because it's pretty scary, right? Like, I have this beautiful truck camper, it's one of my favorite things, it helps me go on these cool adventures, and I'm about to drill a hole through the side of it, and if it doesn't go well, there's really no second chance. The pass-through just makes it really easy to connect and disconnect our Starlink at camp, allowing us to set it up somewhere nearby that has a clear view of the sky for a strong, reliable connection. And if you've seen our other videos, you probably know that we love putting it on a tripod because it makes it easy to adjust and it makes it less likely that someone's going to trip over it and damage it. So as much as I'd like to show you drilling through the side of my rig and installing a new Starlink cable pass-through, I don't need to do that today. So I'm out here in the workshop and we're going to use this lovely piece of wood, and I'm going to show you all the steps I went through and give you some of my tips for making it easy and straightforward and hopefully answer some of your questions. So let's dive in. So these are going to be some of the supplies we're going to use, and I do want to show you, even though we're just going to use this piece of wood to simulate the outside and the inside of the camper, I do have this plug, which is actually what I cut out with the hole saw. And so if you want to check it out, you can see there's a fiberglass layer out here, there's sort of this interior wall layer here, and then in between there's insulation and some other layers. So for me it was about 2 inches of material, but for you it may be a little bit different, but I think this procedure will work well whether you have aluminum sides, fiberglass sides, any kind of composite or metal material you might find in an RV, a camper, something like that. So when I first got the adapter, I made a little template like this, just tracing the holes and the outline of the pass-through. Now, depending on which pass-through you get, it might have a little template with it, or you can just lay it down on a piece of paper and trace it out. All right, so we got our template. I'm just gonna pop some holes to these rounds with a pen. And this is where there's a Phillips head screw that goes in each corner, and that's what secures the actual bracket to the surface. And then there's a center hole, which is where cables and connectors can pass through. All right, now you might be wondering, well, where on the outside of your rig, you're gonna put this? On my rig, I have all sorts of boxes and things that sort of get in the way, and so I have some places where it just is not gonna happen. But interestingly enough, I started on the inside. So as you can see on the inside of my rig, I actually have some room in the back of this cabinet where the water heater is and some other electrical equipment. And so I sort of just went inside the rig and outside the rig and tried to figure out a place where there would be a good clearance. And so once I found that on the inside, I marked a potential place that I was going to drill. And then I sort of went to the outside and used things like the power connector, the city water connector and stuff to measure and just make sure I relatively had it in the right spot, both on the inside and the outside. And then the first hole that I drilled wasn't actually from the outside in, it was from the inside out. And I did that because I figured I was less likely to hit kind of sensitive equipment going in that direction. And so I just picked a pretty small drill bit. I'm gonna grab a 3/16 here. Now you wanna make sure you got a nice sharp drill bit. If you have old drill bits, you might wanna get some new ones. And then I just used my drill to drill a small hole through that. So basically in the inside, put a hole in there. And then that's basically my pilot hole. So you can see in this particular example, I'm a little bit off, so did a little bit better job measuring than I did, but I basically did that. And then I put the template on here like this. I made sure it was gonna line up. Right, worst case, if you needed to move it over a little bit, you could do something like that. Right, and then I basically figured, okay, this is the area where I'm gonna install this on the side of my camper. Now something else I did, especially because I had the fiberglass, and fiberglass can chip a little bit, you can actually see where this did chip a little bit on the corners. I put down some tape, and I was hoping that tape might minimize some of that breakage that might happen. So I'm going to put some tape on here on the outside, and then my hole's right there, where I'm going to go ahead and drill it. So you can sort of see that, mark it again. So when I actually cut this out, I used a hole saw, and this is a 2-inch hole saw. Of course, it really depends on the size of the thing that you bought. If you buy the adapter I recommend, then I used a 2-inch hole saw, which fit pretty well. But you know, if you're using a different size pass-through connector, then you'll need to figure out the right size of that hole that you need. But for the hole saw, what I actually did was I just took off the actual hole saw and got the bit. And I made a pilot hole with this bit. And the reason I did that was I figured I would have a nice guide hole when I was actually doing the 2-inch cutout that would just let me glide right in there and keep everything centered. So next up is this. All right, so now we have our pilot hole. All right, so next up is the moment of truth. So I have my hole saw here. Now I'm gonna start a little bit slower, and then I'm gonna turn it up a little bit once I get a little bite and get in there. So I'll put that in my pilot hole. And you don't necessarily need to put a lot of pressure here. Let the tool do the work. So just rest it on there so there's a little bit of pressure. Now at this point, I put my actual pass-through connector back on the side of the camper. And then I just used a Sharpie or a different marking pen to mark those 4 corners. And then switch to a smaller bit to drill a pilot hole for those screws. And then take that tape off, drill the 4 pilot holes. One nice thing about a lot of the pass-through connectors is they have a gasket that just goes back here, and so you don't need to work with adhesives or sealants. It's just sort of a foam material, and it compresses behind the pass-through adapter, and it just squishes it on there. And we've never had any moisture come through or anything like that, so it's held up very well. Now on the pass-through that we purchased, it accepts keystone connectors, and so it's just a standardized format where you can just clip the connectors in. You can clip them out, clip them in. This is a barrel jack connector for the Starlink Mini, and if you're looking for links to any of these parts or supplies, just check the video description. I'll have them in there and tell you what I used and where I got them. But this is basically just a 2-wire connector, so you can take a positive and a negative wire, and you can just slip them here and screw the terminals down using the screws on the back, and then you can go ahead and take that 2-pair wire and run it to whatever you're hooking up. Now in our case, we have an S-Pod, which acts like a relay for us, so we can turn things on and off. But if you're wiring up directly to the battery, you might want to put an inline fuse or wire to a bus bar that's already fused or something like that. Or if you're using a Starlink Gen 3 standard, you would need an Ethernet connector, and you'd need some Ethernet crimping equipment and fun stuff like that. I find the 2-pair wire way easier for the Starlink Mini, so but there are some good guides on the internet if you need to do the Ethernet. Just search YouTube for it. I hope this demonstration of how to cut a hole in the side of your rig and install a pass-through connector is helpful. You might have some additional questions, so put those below down in the comments, and I'll try and respond to them, and other folks that have done this can share their advice too. I hope that was helpful. If it was, hit the like button so other folks like you can find helpful content like this. And if you'd like to follow along in our adventures as we share tips, tricks, and recommendations for traveling with Starlink at camp, while in motion, and while mixing work and play, hit that subscribe button. I'm Adam from Bantha Overland, and until next time, I hope to see you out there on the trail.